Hi, I'm Dave Smith here on Gearspace.com. As some of you may know, I've been doing this for almost 50 years now, which is kind of scary to think about sometimes. I started back in the 70s. I just had an interest in both music and technology, and when synthesizers first came out, it was a perfect combination of the two. So that led me to building sequencers and playing around with little things in synthesizers until I decided to build my own, which was a pretty big jump at the time because I had never done anything that big, and I was just a kid in my 20s and I didn't know that how much was going to be involved, but I did it anyhow. And my big idea was to combine my background in computers and microprocessors with a new set of synthesizer chips that was coming out. And I thought I should build a polyphonic synthesizer that's 100% programmable. So that's what I did. That's something I've always done is I don't design for the marketplace. I don't look for, what would have the best sales or what the salespeople say. I like to build just what feels right to me and just kind of an intuition. And at the time, the Prophet 5 was the first time I did that. And turned out to be pretty good. It sounded great. It was a breakthrough instrument. Pretty much every synth since then has been polyphonic and programmable, except for monophonic synths. So it's really the first of its kind. And it's amazing how much has gone on since then, because we all saw the synth boom in the late 70s and the 80s, and then it kind of went away for a while, what I call the digital dark ages. Everybody wanted samplers and sample-based stuff and romplers, and it just kind of got boring, because once the M1 came out, everybody built M1s for the next 20 years. They're still building M1s. They're just better. Bigger keyboards, more samples, better samples, more voices, but they're still M1s. So it was actually kind of fun to kind of restart interest in hardware and analog synthesizers in general. You may know that I was involved with the first soft synths in the mid-90s, but I quickly got tired of it because it didn't feel like a musical instrument. There's a whole lot of advantages to soft synths. They're in the box, they're cheap, they're flexible, you could get a lot more variety when it's in software. But to me, it never felt like a musical instrument. I like the interaction of musician and musical instrument. You turn a knob, it gives you a musical idea because you're playing the keyboard. You're not dragging menus. You're not turning around to look at your monitor. So it's much more immediate and much more inspirational, I think, for a musician. So in 2002, 20 years ago this year, as it turns out, I started Dave Smith Instruments just to get back into hardware and to get back into analog hardware. So that was a big turning point for me. And I think that's kind of when analog synths slowly started coming back. That was also the year, 2002, that Bob Moog introduced the Mini Moog Voyager. So I came out with the Evolver, which was I was trying to come up with a new take on synthesis instead of just doing the old stuff. So it was all about tightly coupled analog and digital electronics and coming up with something new. And then, of course, the Mini Moog was Bob putting his stamp back on, coming, analog, here we go again. So I think over those next few years, people started rediscovering analog in general. And they started buying old analog. For a long time, you could buy any old analog synth for $20 at a garage sale because nobody wanted them. Now all of a sudden people are saying, it's interesting. You can have something that's totally electronic, but it could be vintage because they were all different. You buy 5 Prophet 5s back then, and they all sound different. Same for OB8. As we just found out, developing the OBSX, all of the old ones are different. They're all calibrated differently. They're all over the place. every voice on every unit is different. So it was fun to kind of rediscover that, and that's what musicians were doing. They'd buy an old Jupiter or an old CS80, an old Prophet, an old Oberheim, an old Korg, an old Poly 6, whatever. And there was just this joy of rediscovering what analog is and the difference between instruments and their individual personality. So it's been really rewarding to be able to do this twice. You could say, okay, you're in the right place, right time once, like when I did the Prophet 5 and did the first sequential, but to be able to do it again has been really pretty special. And this time I never wanted to, I didn't want a big company. After going through the first time, and we had up to like 180 people at sequential circuits, and that, I never wanted to run a company. So this time around, it was just me for 5 years. So I developed the Evolver, the Poly Evolver, the Evolver monophonic Evolver, and I started working on the Prophet 08, and I said, well, I think I probably need to hire somebody. So I finally hired one person, then I hired a second, and over the next few years, grew to be a huge company. We got up to 15 people. And yet, with only 15 people, we were able to develop all of these awesome products. I think we're up to maybe 18 people now, but for quite a while, it's like 13, 14, 15. So we're very efficient because we're a small company, no marketing, no sales. We just all decided what we wanted to do. And, the experience comes into play. Like I said, having done this for almost 50 years now, we kind of know how to do things. And we don't have to ask opinions. We don't have to take marketing surveys. We all just sit down and say, what do we want to do next? What would be fun? And we'll talk about a few things. We'll say, well, let's do this. So we'll do a Prophet 12. And we'll say, oh, what should we do next? Let's do a Prophet 6. And then let's do the OB6, because why not? And we're still doing that. Redoing the Prophet 5 was something I had put off for 40 years and finally decided the time was right. That's what got me through the whole COVID thing. Being locked up inside my house, that's when I developed the Prophet 5. So it was really good mentally because it kept me busy when I couldn't travel and I couldn't go to shows and see live music. I had this project to keep me busy. And after seeing how that turned out, turning around and a couple of years later doing the OB X8, equally fun. And working with Tom and more so with Marcus to get it just right, recreating something old that I really didn't know that much about. Because of course we were very heavy competitors back in the 70s and 80s. So it was kind of fun to do it now as a partnership and to do it right and to learn all the details. And it's been a lot of fun. And it came out really, really well. It's such a monster synth and completely different from the Prophet 5. Even though we use a lot of the same parts, it's just amazing how different those two instruments are. A lot of it was just how different it was and how they looked at the design. Of course, I did the Prophet 5, so that's what I thought how it should be done. And then when they came out with the OBSX, I said, I wouldn't have done that, and I wouldn't have done that. And they chose specifically to try not to copy the Prophet 5. So it was just interesting to see, okay, how would somebody do something? They knew they had to build a polyphonic analog synth because I had dented their sales quite a bit. So they had to move quickly, and so it's interesting. But I've never been very good at researching other people's products, so even now, so I couldn't tell you what any specific instrument does, partially because I'm lazy, but also because I don't want it to influence my designs, because it's too easy to say, oh, this product has this feature, we better incorporate it, or we're going to fall behind, or it's really hard to step back and to try to keep a clear focus when you're coming up with a new instrument. So back then, I didn't really know how an OBX worked. So this was actually the first time. So it's like, oh, sometimes I'd say, that's kind of a weird way to do it. Why did you do that? And other times it'd be, oh, well, I kind of see why you did that. That sort of makes sense. But it was just a very interesting journey.
Right. What's new? What's old? What do you keep? What do you throw away?
Well, one of the reasons that I waited so long to build it is because I couldn't have built it without the same integrated circuits from Curtis, and they just weren't available. And they started rebuilding the oscillator chip and the filter chip. So when they started doing that, I go, oh, well, now I can build a real Prophet 5. And at the same time, Dave Rossum, who designed the original solid-state music chipset, redesigned one of the filters. So the original filters I use in Rev 1 and Rev 2 were now available, and the filters and the oscillators I used for Rev 3s were available. So I could build a new Prophet 5 that incorporated both. So we actually have two hardware filters in there, and they're both exact. So there was a lot of new design that had to be done to make all this work together and be exact and match the old instruments, but take it to another level at the same time with a lot of modern day features. But we were very careful about not adding too much. So, like, it's still a monophonic audio output. At one point we said, oh, should we do stereo? And we thought, no, we shouldn't. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a Prophet 5. Should we add effects? Well, we could, but no. And the same thing. So if you look at the front panel, there's only like 2 or 3 new switches and knobs on it. It's the same display. There's more programs, but it's really the same thing. We wanted to keep it exact. The measurements are exactly the same as the old one. The wood, everything looks exactly the same. So, and that's where the magic comes in. And of course, since I did the first one, and I did this with our team now, I was able to make the decisions intelligently about what to put in and what not to, and why. And I didn't have to have a committee of meetings and didn't have to try to figure out somebody else's product because I already knew. So had a big advantage.
What's the idea behind your range of synthesizers?
And we don't have. It's funny because we got purchased by Focusrite, and one of the first questions they asked, well, can we see your forecast? And I said, we don't have any. We would never decide what we were building next until we get done with one and we say, what should we do next? So every instrument, there'd be some overlap when we work on one before we start on the next. But yeah, it's like I couldn't tell you what we're doing in 3 years because I don't know. It'll be whatever makes the most sense, whatever will be the most fun. So, we jump from the, I can't even remember the order of things. Like the Prophet 12 is still one of my favorites. It's very different from the rest of them. The Rev 2, we had been shipping the Prophet 08 for 10 years already and realized people were still buying it. So we said, well, we should probably update it. Because, I designed that in like 2006. So we came out with the Rev 2 and we're still selling them like hotcakes, after 15 years. So one of our advantages is we don't build new products to replace old products. We build new products that get added to our product line. And it's a good way to have a company grow.
What makes it cool?
That was a little harder to pinpoint because, again, when you have as much experience as I do, and our old team has been together for so long, that we just kind of can sit down and we'll draw something on the board. And we may start with, like in the Pro 3 would say, let's do a monophonic synth that has all 3 of the most famous legacy filters. And then let's put 2 VCOs in, but let's put a digital wavetable synth in also. And let's start with the Pro 2 sequencer and enhance it and make it even easier to use. And we'll keep all the control voltages in and out. And it just, the more we talk about it, the more fun it sounded. And then we start drawing things on a whiteboard. And let's do this, and no, let's take out that knob, but let's add this switch. And it's just, it gets us excited.
Right.
You know, there's no rules for this.
Right.
It's just, I don't know, the advantage of experience, I suppose. So yeah, it's just all of the above. And once we decide on something, we're very efficient and quick at developing it, because again, we're not talking to the sales team about what's going to sell next year, or the marketing team who says we have to have this feature like this other competitor does. We just start designing it. And we don't build prototypes. We start immediately with the complete unit, all the circuit boards, all the software, and we build a prototype, and then we'll build another 20 prototypes, to develop the sounds and all that, and then we start production. So we could start from scratch and 9 months later be shipping a product.
Right.
And that's how we have so many awesome products with only 15 people. But actually, surprisingly, we'll probably have something in 3 or 4 months.
Right.
So we'll start shipping the OBX8 maybe this month or definitely next month.
Right.
But we'll have something else for maybe August or September, another new keyboard. So we like to keep things moving and
Right.
give people more choices.
How do you circumvent the chip shortage?
A lot of work.
Right.
We have wasted so much time in the last year and a half redesigning, changing things to get parts. If we can't get this part, but we could use this part instead. So we'll actually change our designs. And since we're small and fast, we could do that. And we're not buying things by the container from China. We're built in California, near our factory, near our office. So we could work very quickly and build new prototypes and test them. And fortunately, all the really important analog parts, we have enough supply.
Okay.
So it's very, very hard. And it's been a very big challenge, but I think we're doing better than most manufacturers as far as continually shipping, even dealing with this. But yeah, what a pain.
Yeah.
The OBX8 should have been out sooner,
Okay.
but except for buying parts for older instruments, that's taken a lot of engineering time.
I think the timing is perfect, actually.
It's what?
The timing is perfect, actually.
Yes, I think so. It's always
So
good.
that's fortunate.
Yes.
All right. Well,
Great.
Thank you very much for this interview.
You're welcome.